this happened at a Wells Fargo, and this is how insane wage slavery, just office work in general, has gotten in the United States.
A Tempe Wells Fargo employee died at her desk, and 12 News is now confirming that it may have taken as many as 4 days for anyone in the office to notice. Good evening, and thanks so much for joining us for 12 News at 10. I'm Kariba Devine.
I'm Mark Curtis. It's a story we first reported yesterday. Tonight, Tempe police are confirming the timeline of when the woman clocked in to when her colleagues found the body. 12 News journalist Gabriela Becerra is in the studio with new details tonight. Gabby, 4 days. I mean, this poor woman went 4 days undiscovered. It's hard to believe.
And that's a question many employees are asking themselves tonight. I spoke
4 days dead at your cubicle
with an employee who said that she shared her perspective on the workplace environment, and they say it's a big building, but most people don't work there on a daily basis. A Wells Fargo employee went to work the morning of Friday, August 16th, and never went home. Tempe police tell 12 News 60-year-old Denise Prudhomme scanned into work at 7 o'clock in the morning. 4 days later, police responded to the office building near Washington Street and Priest Drive for reports of a subject down. Prudhomme was declared dead.
I think this says a few things about our office environment. I feel like it says something about the amount of time people work, but I suppose you could be a light worker and still die at your desk. It shows how much we've been separated and atomized, how much we just work alone in its silence, and no one even checked on her. No one thought, hey, I'm going to go say hi to whatever her name was. Like, it's just so crazy. Of course, it's a Wells Fargo. I feel like that is important, even though some may say it's not important. Later in the report, they say some felt that there was a bad smell in the building, but they just thought it was the pipes. It's like no one thought to see what was going on. And then what? This just is a perfect metaphor for how aggressively awful this wage slave system is. And the fact that it happened at a Wells Fargo, just all the better that this is how much Wells Fargo cares for their employees. Also, you have to clock in, right? There's a computer system where you say, hey, I arrived at work. And apparently there's nothing in the computer system that says, hey, this person never went home for 4 days. Like, if you've got a computer system clocking people in, why would it not notice that? And I felt like this was a good segue to just how hard many Americans have it right now. As we're seeing, and of course, to relate this to the larger electoral bullshit right now, as we're seeing two candidates who do not give a tip of a turd about your average worker, about people that are slaving away. So every once in a while, I'll throw a little lip service to it. But for the most part, it's nothing. The closest you'll get is they're both now saying, I think Trump said it first, that they're going to get rid of taxes on tips. And it's like, even if they did that, which I'm sure they won't, but even if they did that, that is beyond nothing for a system that is as exploitative as the capitalist shit show we're in right now. I want to show these from Phil Mandelbaum. He does great work over there on his Twitter and other places. He put together this: 50 million people in America go to bed hungry every night. There are 30 vacant housing units per unhoused person. And I've had numbers close to that. I've mentioned them for a long time, that there's 17 million vacant homes across the entire U.S. Now, if you take the number we're told of how many people are homeless across America, they often say 600, 700,000. Then, you divide that into 17 million and you get close to 30 houses per person. But I actually think that those numbers are not quite accurate. So, he's working off of somewhat different numbers, but not that different. I often said there's 17 empty homes and he's saying 30. Anyway, the entire houseless population could be housed for the price of one aircraft carrier. One aircraft carrier could house the entire homeless population. And in fact, in certain ways, it'd be zero aircraft carriers, because in states where they have decided to house the homeless, to give every chronically homeless person an apartment, they've actually saved money. The state has saved money. So he's talking about, if you don't count the savings of money and you just look at how much it would cost to house someone. But in fact, it wouldn't even be an aircraft carrier. It would just be, you could do it and get money back. housing everyone. 41% of Americans with houses are struggling to keep them. 31% with houses. And that, just to add to that, it's like 60% of Americans can't afford houses. So you have 40% of Americans with houses, and of that 40%, 30% say they're struggling to keep them. This is more than 40% of Americans are facing financial hardship. That's in 2024, and that number has just gotten worse. It's not like things are getting better. 39% 2023, 35% 2022. And, a bar graph just always makes everything much more edible, doesn't it? It makes data more edible. Military contractors can expect $470 billion from the bipartisan budget agreement of 2024. $470 billion. That's just going to military contractors. That's not the entirety of the Pentagon's budget, obviously. The bill adopts Biden's $886 billion military spending request. But if you include black budgets and everything else, everything that's not listed in the military budget, I'm not even sure Department of Homeland Security or NSA or anything's in there. You get well over $1 trillion spent on military and intelligence, which is an unbelievable number. It's a number that it'll make pus ooze out your ears if you just try and think about it for a minute. And you don't ask me where the pus comes from. I have not researched that. But $1 trillion, I often mention that if you make $40,000 a year at your job after taxes, then in order to make $1 trillion, you'd have to work for 25 million years. So so if we were to put the Pentagon's budget on one dude, if we were just to put it on one guy named Gary, then Gary would, you just have to check back with him 25 million years from now to see how it was going. You could check back 24 million years from now and just be like, hey, we're getting close. Are we anywhere near it? You only got 1 million years left. So compare this to in 2022, CEOs were paid 344 times as much as a typical worker. 344 times as much as a typical worker. In contrast to 1965, when they were paid 21 times. Can you imagine what it was like back in 1965, where your boss only made 21 times as much as you? It must have just been, you must have felt like equality. You must have seen your boss and been like, sure, he can drive a Mercedes or whatever, a BMW, but he doesn't have 6 yachts. It just feels so much closer to equality. Only 21 times as much. In 2021, CEOs made nearly 8 times as much as the top 0.1% of wage earners in the U.S. The dramatic increase in CEO compensation during the pandemic is remarkable. CEOs' realized compensation jumped 30.3% between 2019 and 2021. The pandemic was just a bonanza for the richest Americans. Just a bonanza. This does not mean every business did well. A lot of businesses went out of business. I mean, more so mom and pop businesses, but still, a lot of people went out of business. But the richest of the rich, it was a fucking bonanza. $4.5 trillion was dumped into Wall Street during the pandemic just to keep things rolling. They increased the U.S. monetary supply, the number of dollars in circulation, by 20%. And as I mentioned many times, although, it still doesn't seem to be catching on. It still doesn't seem like many people are talking about it. If you were to do that in just about any other country, almost any other country, if you were to increase the monetary supply by 20% over the span of a few years, then that currency would be 20% more worthless, or maybe far more than that. It would the inflation would be nuts. Getting a movie ticket would be like $300 or something. But the U.S. doesn't have that problem. We just print all the money we want because the petrodollar keeps the strength of U.S. currency. So while all of that's going on, while 40% of people are in financial straits, barely afford a home, those who have homes, so only 60% of Americans can't afford a home. There's 30 vacant homes for every houseless person, unhoused person. While all that's going on, I haven't seen anybody mention this almost at all, I covered it back when it came out. I don't remember, maybe a couple of years ago. But poverty murders 1,300 people per day in America. 1,300 per day die from poverty. This was a study from the University of California, and it was covered in this Vox article, but it's really not mentioned enough. So if you were to put this on a list of the top causes of death across America, number one, of course, being e-scooter accidents. No, number one being heart disease, 2 is cancer, 3 is smoking. Cumulative poverty, meaning being poor for over 10 years, would be the 4th biggest killer in America. And single year poverty would be 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th biggest killer in the country. And if you add those two numbers together, 295,000 a year plus 183,000 a year, and you divide by the 365 days, you get 1,300 people murdered per day by poverty. I feel like this is something that should be talked about more. And this is one of those things where if you had a legitimate presidential candidate, and I know Bernie Sanders has horrified many people over the past several years, but back when Bernie Sanders was running in 2016, if you had a candidate like that, these are the type of numbers that would be incredibly valuable to be saying constantly, to go up in front of people, to go up in front of the American people and say, 1,300 Americans die per day from poverty. There are 17 million vacant homes across America, while 60% of Americans can't afford a home. These are the type of numbers that should be just repeated and repeated and repeated to get people to understand the utter insanity of this situation, the utter insanity of having our systems set up like this. But we don't have any candidates like that. I mean, in the two parties that the media is allowed to talk about. Obviously, Jill Stein does great on this. Claudia De La Cruz, Cornel West. But of the two parties that will have $1 trillion to spend on their election, you will not hear this stuff mentioned because they don't actually want to fucking do anything about it. If they mention it, they have to then try and do something about it. But they're not going to. Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or Donald Trump or PC Vance or whatever the fuck his name is. No, JD Vance. None of them. They don't want to do anything about it, so they're not going to talk about it. 1,300 people a day. That's similar to the number of people that our police kill per year. Now, the number of people our police kill per year is horrifying. Also, the number of people our police kill per year is actually double 1,300 because Lancet Medical Journal says that roughly 55% of all deaths by police are not put down as deaths by police.